Well, one man who has got grave concerns, as I say, is Peter Hitchens, columnist for the Mail on Sunday, who I'm delighted to say joins us now. Good afternoon, Peter.
Hello.
You made me really think with your column yesterday.
That's very pleasing for you to say that, because it is my main intention in life, is to make people think.
Well, just to stop and think, hold on a minute, that's a different way of looking at it. Now, your headline is, Our Noble Cause, Dropping Bombs on Behalf of Al-Qaeda. Explain to me your concerns for those who haven't read it, Peter.
All right, well, here, how long have I got? Here's the first thing, and I wanted to surprise people with what is absolutely true. The principal beneficiaries of the American cruise missile strike are the so-called Syrian opposition, the opponents of the Assad government there. I'm not calling it a regime deliberately, because I don't want to seem partial one way or another. But the opposition, as they're described, are not made up of the Liberal Democrats or the Labour Party or Quakers or Girl Guides. They're principally run by an organization among whose many names, the most memorable is the Al-Nusra Front. And the Al-Nusra Front is an affiliate and franchise of what we used to call Al-Qaeda and fear it. And these are the people who are principally running the armed campaign against the Assad government and who have been his principal opponents in the civil war. Now, I can give you a record as long as my arm, and you'll find it on my website, on my blog, the list of the many occasions on which I have criticized the Assad regime going back for many years, back to the time when the Syrian government in London, their embassy was used by Nizar Hindawi, a terrorist who tried to blow up an El Al plane, and their sheltering of the appalling Alois Brunner, the Nazi war criminal who was responsible for child murder at the Drancy camp for the deportation of Jews to extermination in France. So it's not a nice regime. I've never been enthusiastic about it. I criticized also the President Assad's father, Hafez, for his extraordinary actions in the city of Hama, where he opened fire with artillery on a populated city because it was full of his opponents. It's not, don't, whatever you do, start suggesting or listen to anyone who suggests that I'm a spokesman for the Assad government.
Okay.
But what is true about Syria before the current troubles broke out was that although it was undoubtedly a police state founded on torture, it was relatively peaceful and surprisingly secular for the Middle East. And there are a few countries in the Middle East where, for instance, Christians can still operate more or less undisturbed. Syria was one of them, Jordan's another. Egypt, as we see to a lesser extent, the tragic events of the weekend, is another. Christians, by and large, are leaving the Middle East in quite large numbers because of their fears for the future. But in Syria, a mainly secular government was broadly tolerant in religious ways, and certainly not a kind of Saudi Arabian type Wahhabi strict Islamic country. All kinds of secular activities were permitted. Now, if you would prefer a strict Islamic regime, then no doubt the Al-Nusra Front and Al-Qaeda would be your boys. But what puzzles me slightly is why the United States and Britain and France and various Gulf countries have been actively, for the past 6 or 7 years, supporting the activities of the Al-Nusra Front and trying to overthrow the Assad government. Indeed, whenever any attempt is made to reach a settlement on this, it breaks down because they say flatly that whatever happens, Assad must go.
But only last week...
There's no compromise offered on this. There have been plenty of opportunities to compromise, but none have been taken. But what is actually happening in Syria is that the West has now intervened very strongly on the side of the Al-Nusra Front, an Al-Qaeda affiliate, and the United States using its missile power on this side will have made Al-Nusra absolutely cock-a-hoop. I mean, they've had anti-tank weapons and guns and ammunition and political and diplomatic support before. But to have 59 cruise missiles on your side is something entirely new, and also to have the United States openly demanding now that the Assad government must go and Assad must go, which is their principal demand.
But they didn't demand that a week ago. A week ago they were saying maybe there'd be no need to remove Assad.
Precisely so. And
yeah.
this was an extraordinary actual victory for Assad against al-Nusra, which I was astonished when it happened, because it seemed to me that from my point of view, I have two interests. One is the interest of my own country, which I'm sick and tired of us being dragged into stupid and dangerous wars of choice, which destroy our reputation, often do bad things, and frequently make a terrible mess of the Middle East. And I'm also sick of our extraordinary willingness to rush into war in general, which seems to me to endanger the country. And that's my principal motivation in saying all these things is a patriotic one. I'm worried above all about Britain, its standing, its reputation, and indeed ultimately its safety. And I think wars of choice are terribly dangerous to that. But the second thing that one has to worry about is the Syrian people, most of whom are not politically active or interested in politics, who want to get on with their lives, raising families, going to work, having an occasional day off, the sort of thing we all want to do. And since this thing began, we have turned millions of Syrians into refugees and hundreds of thousands of them into corpses. And I long for this to stop. Because I feel that any civilized human, particularly Christian person, and indeed Muslim people, must feel a terrible pain for the suffering of these people as a result of this war. And it is the war that has brought the suffering. And the end of the war will end the suffering and allow refugees to return home and rebuild normal lives, which is all they long to do. And I saw, when that announcement came from the United States, that they'd given up trying to overthrow Assad, I thought, at last, whatever else happens, Syria may be at peace again in years to come, and people may be able to go and sit under their vine, under their fig tree again. But they can't, because now we've got cruise missiles.
But did he carry out the chemical attack? Because, again, over the weekend, we've still got no conclusive evidence, have we? Meanwhile, we've got people like Boris Johnson cancelling trips to Russia. We seem to be upping the ante with them as
stick
well.
To one subject, Shell, about what happened in Idlib province last week. And here I have to insist on this. How does anybody know what happened?
Yeah.
We have seen reports. These reports have not come to us through independent media. They have come to us from people on the spot. Now, in my column on Sunday, which is again on my blog, I go into some details of one of the people involved in the videos which was shown, who seems to me to be interesting. I'm not going to go into this on the program here, but I would urge people who've taken this at face value to at least look at this and see whether it changes their mind, because I think there's a fascinating detail about one of those people who was at one time a British doctor who features, and it's worth looking up his past and wondering exactly what you're being shown. But if you look at coverage of both this and what was going on in eastern Aleppo a few months ago, where we were pretty much told the Russians were total barbarians for doing almost exactly what we are doing in Mosul at the moment, the reports on which this was based came from within areas controlled largely by al-Nusra. And you will have to ask the media organizations involved, you'll have to ask them why it is that they do not have any staff reporters based in London or any other Western capital in these areas. I can only ask you to ask that, but the fact is they don't. And therefore what we are getting is material which we cannot verify, which we cannot control, which we do not know to be wholly independent. And also anybody who did get in there, and I again, there's another argument I want to get into here, but anybody who did get in there, you have to ask again, how do they get in? Under what protection are they when they are there? How much are they allowed to see? Who are they allowed to talk to? And again, if someone goes, say, to Syria and they don't report that they are constantly shadowed by government minders, then they're misleading you. And I think that because this is a fact of life. If you go to countries of this kind, repressive countries of this kind, journalists don't operate freely. Well, do journalists operate freely in the areas controlled by al-Nusra? Could they? Could United Nations investigators or diplomats operate freely in areas controlled by al-Nusra? Can they? You just asking these questions makes it plain that what we're doing here is looking at information which cannot be verified.
I appreciate that fully.
It may be true, it may not be true.
Sure.
People say, well, do you think they made it up then? Is it? And I say, I haven't the faintest idea what happened. The point is, nor have you.
No,
and to reach the conclusion on the basis of this that it was definitely the work of the Assad government, that the Assad government actually gassed people in Idlib province last week, seems to me to be jumping far too far ahead of any facts or true evidence that we have. If you look, as I have done, at the United Nations reports on allegations of chemical warfare in the Syrian civil war, of which there are quite a few, you will find that even where they have concluded that the Assad government did use chemical warfare, the evidence is actually quite sketchy. In the crucial episode in Ghouta in Damascus in, I think, August 2013, which is the one always cited where Obama was supposed to cross his red line, didn't, the United Nations report does not conclude that the Assad government used chemical weapons at Ghouta. It simply does not do so, and yet every politician and every journalist I read and hear on this repeatedly says that Assad used chemical weapons at Ghouta. And I have to say, well, where are you getting this from? How do you know? I don't know. I can't find anything which confirms it. And I do wish that, and war is a terrible business. I'm privileged in that I have seen the edges of war a few times in my life, never intentionally. And I cannot begin to tell you the horrible thing that it is. And how much it fills me with dread. And any attempt by anybody to whip up war must be treated with skepticism.
Are you worried now that there is going to be an escalation, Peter? Or can we pull back from this position?
Well, of course I'm worried, because if once a line of this kind has been crossed, once the United States has dropped high explosive on a sovereign country, a line has been crossed, and all kinds of things could follow from it. And there is a grave danger, of course, because of the presence of Russians in the area, that this then stretches outside the Middle East, and even horror of horrors, and this is something which I think should really make people's flesh creep, becomes a European conflict.
Peter, fascinating.
And I can't. I just find that so.
The
very thought of it so appalling that I can only say, look, whatever. No, if anybody listening to this thinks that I'm not appalled by the idea of people being gassed, then they're quite wrong. I'm as appalled as anybody, but I'm not prepared to be manipulated into approving a dangerous escalation of war. First of all, I demand facts rather than claims and presuppositions. Secondly, even if these facts are true, does it justify entering into a war which could spread beyond the Middle East and even into Europe? And if that's what you want, you may get it, but be careful if that's what you want, that it is what you want, and that you understand that war once begun is very, very hard to end and can spread into places and into lives which never expected to be touched by it.
Peter, thank you very much for your contribution, and thanks very much indeed for your blog and your column in the paper yesterday. I'm sure a lot of people will check it out. Thank you very much.
I do hope so. I'm merely intending to influence people towards thought, as I
well, you certainly did that. You certainly did that. Thanks very much indeed, Peter.